Hello, everybody. Welcome to the True Crime News. This week, Rachel has not been feeling well. So she can't join us. She's not up to it. So Michelle Gower, who's joined us in the past, she is our co-host for tonight. Say hello, Michelle Gower.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, you didn't go for that cheesy joke. Hello, Michelle. I'm Michelle Gower.
No,
Okay.
not tonight. I'm too tired.
Well, we're doing something a little different. Instead of doing a group of different stories, there was a cause that caught my attention. I was watching Dr. Phil this week, and it's about a guy who is in prison. He's been there, I think, for 18 years. And what happened was he murdered his stepfather because he caught him sexually abusing his sisters, which happened to him when he was much younger. And but in court, that was never mentioned at all. The only information that came across to the judge and the jury was that he committed the murder, and so there was nothing about the history of abuse that affected him or his sisters. So we're going to go through first an article that basically acts like a fact sheet, and we'll go through it point by point. So as it goes, Christopher Bennett had a hard life. He had been in and out of foster care and had living arrangements that sometimes included living in shacks with no electricity or running water. His father was an alcoholic, and one of his four brothers died at an early age after a heart transplant. The countryside in his Augusta County, Virginia life might be idyllic, but his life was not. After divorcing from his biological father, Christopher's mother started dating Vincent McDormand, and his nightmare continued. At age 8, McDormand began molesting Christopher. Under threat of harming his mother, Christopher never spoke up, but in later years, family and school officials started seeing signs McDormand may be a child molester and reported him to police. The investigation went nowhere, and McDormand's on-again, off-again relationship with Christopher's mother continued. There does seem to have been some fishy about Vincent McDormand's connection to the local law enforcement in this town, because even later on when he was abusing the girls and they started telling people, they did nothing about it, and CAS would come around and investigate, and they would just touch base and say, yeah, we got a report, and he'd say, oh yeah, nothing's going on, and they wouldn't even come and look at the girls. So it seems to have been a matter of small town justice, I guess.
That's what it sounds like, unfortunately.
Yeah, sometimes this corruption goes on there. Maybe it was the kind of place where it's so old school that people just assume that the father's always right.
Well, and if it's from a smaller town, it tends to be one of those families grew up there generational. We don't know what kind of influence his family may have had or what kind of impact they had on the community that could potentially give him, and this is speculation, but potentially give him any immunity from any wrongdoing towards anybody.
Yeah. It's like in my father's hometown, my cousin was molested by her friend's father, and everyone believed him that when he denied it. And because this other girl who had been molested by him was too afraid to come forward and testify against him, the trial was over and he got away with it. So these things happen in small towns, and I think you're right. People they protect each other, or these old families, they just have they become an institution, just like how they had their own pew at the church. Seems like they're really hard to fight against.
Yeah.
So, 10 years after the molestation began, Christopher thought he finally found a way to put McDormand in prison, not for molestation, but for bribery. On the afternoon of July 25th, 2003, McDormand offered Christopher a bribe if he would testify against his own mother in their custody battle over his 3 half-sisters. McDormand wrote out the check for $750 and showed it to Christopher. But before Christopher could accept or deny, McDormand changed his mind and shoved his checkbook back into his pocket. So, ultimately, McDormand won that custody battle, which was really bad news for the girls. because that left him alone with them to do whatever he wanted with them. And I think he was sexually abusing them like every day. Their mother was an alcoholic, so she wasn't really able to intervene. So she was out of it. So Christopher stewed for the afternoon before he came up with a plan to retrieve the check and prove to the court McDormand had tried to bribe him. There was no way he wanted his half-sisters, aged 6, 7, and 9, to be forced to endure what he was sure McDormand had in store for them. He called up a friend, borrowed a 7mm rifle, put on a mask and gloves, and went to the McDormand residence with the intention of breaking in and stealing the check out of his estranged stepfather's checkbook to produce in court the next day. When Christopher broke in, his worst fears were realized. He heard his 6-year-old half-sister Vicky crying and begging McDormand to stop touching her privates, and his mind overloaded. When McDormand walked out of the bedroom, Christopher shot him. 2 days later, he confessed his crimes to investigators. So as he put it, yeah, he just totally lost it. Started working on impulse. His anger got the better of him. What he described on the Dr. Phil show is that he saw McDormand, Larry McDormand, I think, no, Vincent McDormand. He was on top of his sister, and he had his hand between her legs. So he saw clearly what was going on. And there had been reports in the past, like she showed her mother that her privates were red, they were sore, and a school bus driver said that one day when he was on the bus with her, Vincent, that he had his hand between her legs. He was that brazen. So that's how dysfunctional this family situation was. And so as far as the trial goes, although Christopher explained to investigators why he did what he did, his confession stopped the investigation. Christopher was charged with capital murder, breaking and entering with a deadly weapon, and robbery. As you might expect, Christopher applied for and was given a court-appointed attorney, except in the tiny town of Craigsville, Virginia, population 929, everyone knows everyone, and finding an attorney who wasn't one of the local good old boys was all but impossible. Christopher's court-appointed attorney was quick to advise him to take a plea deal in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. There was no investigation. His half-sisters say they were never interviewed by either the prosecution or defense. Discrepancies shown in the autopsy report were never looked into. And perhaps the most puzzling and egregious omission by Christopher's own attorney was the report of the state-appointed psychologist, which was handed over by the prosecution 2 weeks before he pled guilty. The report stated Christopher no longer had the mental capacity to restrain his acts, and went on to say the early prolonged exposure to physical and sexual abuse by McDormand resulted in factors causing the feelings towards McDormand to be vulnerable to understandable and justified escalation. Christopher was not advised of this report until 2 weeks after he pled guilty. According to Christopher, he would never have agreed to a plea deal had he known there was a viable defense. Instead, on December 17, 2003, Christopher Bennett pled guilty to all counts. There was no death penalty, but the sentence handed down shocked Christopher's family. 600 years for capital murder, 600 years for breaking and entering with a deadly weapon, and 600 years for robbery, a combined total of 1,800 years. Doesn't this almost qualify as a mistrial?
It's fucking overkill. And it's completely asinine. The thing that irked me the most when researching this, because I didn't watch the Dr. Phil episode, I was reading the articles online and, trying to dig up stuff. It's just the fact that with all the evidence that was never brought about or, that got dismissed, on his behalf, that would have been a great defense. Like, even now, knowing now everything, the fact that he's still in jail when other people who've been in his situation or similar situations have been, exonerated or, had their sentences reduced and they're released, it makes me wonder, like, who's pulling the strings with this one? Like, why make him such an example when his story is not the first story like this that we've heard.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and to not even introduce the whole record of all the calls to children's aid or children's services, you call.
Right, exactly. There's a mountain of evidence that just got kicked under the rug. And he had, to take a plea deal, like that. And then obviously they're making an example of him, and I don't know if that's because it's a small town, or I don't know, like with it being such a tiny place, like I said, who's pulling the strings, who's involved, who's at stake or who's at risk if he were to succeed in his case. But 1800 years, like, are you shitting me?
Yeah, 1800. Yeah, it's unbelievable. So, and I just want to just tell everyone before we go on that there's a petition that people are signing, and the deal is once they reach 150 signatures, they're going to submit it to the governor of Virginia because he's the only person who can overturn that sentence and maybe free him. And demonstrations are going on. So the link is change.org, and let me see what the rest of it is here. Yeah, so it's change.org/P/A hero sentenced to prison for killing a child molester. If you can look it up that way. They have there's Facebook pages as well, and they provide the link. Facebook groups about this, the Christopher Bennett story. So I would urge everybody to sign that petition. So going on here, Christopher has now been in prison for almost 18 years, and the sisters he saved from years of continued sexual molestation and emotional torture want their brother back. By the way, their father was so twisted and malicious in this abuse, like he even took photographs of them in the nude. He shot video. So that's how despicable it was. And so one of his sisters said, Chris gave me a choice to keep going. He gave me my life back. We no longer have to wake up wondering in fear what will happen today. The only thing I have to worry about now are my kids' health and bringing Chris home. He gave up everything to protect us. He has spent his life in prison over something that could have been prevented if the system did its job. I'll be forever in debt to my brother because he gave me a chance to live my life without fear and pain. He gave me a chance to actually find love that everyone deserves. Middle sister Cassie said, and younger sister Vicky, the victim of the molestation that fateful night, agrees. Most kids growing up are afraid of the monster under their bed, but I was terrified of the monster that would drag me into this. Chris had to deal with the same monster and the same torture. No one was able to save him, but he was able to save me and my two sisters and ended up unknowingly sacrificing his life as well when he shouldn't have had to. Most heroes got a medal. My hero was thrown in prison. He saved us and has done more than enough time. So Christopher has filed appeals and even a writ of habeas corpus, and they've all been denied. Now the family is asking the governor of Virginia to commute his sentence. On the Facebook page, Free Christopher Bennett, the family organizes rallies, sells wristbands, and face masks with the hashtag Free Christopher Bennett and Save Our Hero printed on them. And they update followers on the legal wrangling of Christopher's case. They have a petition with, at the time of this, 70,000 signatures, but actually it's closer to 145,000 signatures now. So they're getting close.
It just baffles me because like when I was trying to do like research not only on his specific case, but trying to compare and contrast to other cases that had a bunch of similarities to what occurred. So unfortunately, killing your parents or step parents based on abuse and neglect and things like that it's more common than we realize. To the point where they have it broken down as to like, males and females are, the circumstances regarding if they kill a father versus a mother, and being arrested for that and then later exonerated based on the amount of abuse and torment that the victims suffered to get to the point where obviously a normal person is not going to sit there and plot how to get their parent or step parent incarcerated. You know,
Yeah.
that's not a healthy, obviously, relationship or dynamic to have. Um, when I was doing the research, it just kind of brought me back to this one instance with her name was Cheryl, I believe it was Cuccio. And it happened, I believe, in the late 80s, early 90s. But her story, she was an American woman. And when she was in high school, she actually, her and her boyfriend hired a guy to kill her dad for her. And all three of them got arrested because he did go through with it. But she was later released based on, the amount of abuse and everything. Because I guess it started with molestation. And then when she got old enough, her dad was like raping her on a regular basis. Her mom kind of turned a blind eye, and then she eventually realized her younger siblings were starting to go through the same pattern she did. And that's when she tried to hire a hitman. And it kind of reminds me of Christopher's scenario where it's like, it's one thing when it happens to you, but when you're trying to protect the rest of your family, especially the younger, more your kids are innocent. No one wants that in their life. And I mean, I just don't understand how they couldn't see that.
And it was,
Even in a small town, like family's family, and a healthy family dynamic, like that shouldn't be something that crosses your mind. You shouldn't have to live in fear and overlook abuse and things like that because I mean it happens to everybody regardless of demographic background. Like just because you're a good old boy, and you come from a small town doesn't mean it doesn't have its dark secrets.
oh, of course.
Like it all needs to be taken seriously, and I feel like, when towns like that, I mean, they band together for better or for worse, and ultimately someone pays the price for it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, what made it possible for him to do it for so long was that he did have a tremendous amount of power over their lives. They had a mother who was an alcoholic, so she was out of it. His name was the only name on the deed of the house. He was the breadwinner, and so yeah, he just had all this control. And there was nothing. The mother, I don't even think the mother was aware that the sexual abuse was going on
yeah.
because she was drunk. So that's, I mean, it seems like and since you know, children's services wouldn't even go to the house to take a look at anything, they were trapped. That was
Yeah.
Christopher was the only person who could liberate them from that. I mean,
Yeah.
they ran away several times, but they always ended up back there. I mean, I think running away when you live in the country must be a lot harder than if you live in a city, right? Because everyone
I
recognizes you, you know.
I would think so. And when you're a teenager or even like a preteen and you're running away, a lot of people aren't going to take your emotions seriously because they think you're just being dramatic at your
Yeah,
age.
yeah,
And,
they were also
the
little too, yeah, they were also little too, so probably thought, oh, she's probably wandered away from their home. We should take her back home. Whoever recognized them, right? So
right. And, oh, they're just telling a sad story because their parent pissed them off. It's not actually
well,
anything. But yeah.
so yeah, I mean, and Christopher had been through the same thing, and he tried to talk to Dr. Phil about the sexual abuse, but he started to kind of get choked up. It was too disturbing for him to talk about.
Yeah,
So
well, I mean, going through counseling myself, I mean, you learn that when you experience traumatic events, especially if it's something, that was a huge part of your life, anytime you talk about it, it's like it's ripping open an old wound as part of the healing process. It's the more you talk about it, you get more comfortable talking about it, but that doesn't make it easier.
yeah,
It's hitting deep and, just between the physical and sexual abuse and just the power play. Like that's such psychological torture when you're like emotionally caged and physically trapped because someone literally has everything in their power. They have all the cards in their hand, the breadwinner. Mom's obviously not there to help. So it's like you have to rely on the abuser for some things.
yeah,
And It's just sick. It's totally sick. I hate it.
And there's something about that kind of abuse too, where the victims, another reason the victims are reluctant to speak out about it is that it has a way of shaming the family, even though everyone knows one person's responsible and what happened was wrong, it was abuse. It's like it still taints the family. It's like, oh yeah,
Right. It's a total mind fuck. And it either works one of two ways. It either works in, oh, the whole family shamed, or, oh, you fucking destroyed your family.
yeah,
Like the person doing the bad thing isn't at fault. The person who exposes it is. And then it's like either way, you're getting ostracized from family, community. It's not healthy. None of it
yeah,
is. And why is it that they couldn't get jurors and people involved in the court case from out of town to work on it who wouldn't have such an investment in the outcome for that community?
yeah. Because I've worked on so many cases for the show where they mentioned that they had to go out of their way to get jurors who were not biased, who lived in another town, or they would move the trial to
Exactly.
another town because of media coverage, and or if it was a tiny town, everyone knew about it, and they were heavily biased against the defendant or something. But in
Right.
this case, he was protected even after he was dead.
Yeah.
So
And the thing that sucks too is getting a court appointed lawyer, especially if they're public, you don't hire in private. Their caseloads are normally like astronomical, like normal, like private lawyers do not handle the type of caseloads public do. And for the public, I mean, unfortunately, like any other job, you're going to have people involved. Not saying that this was the case, but again, speculation that maybe, you know, given the circumstances and the background of the family, the lawyer was just quick to point for a plea deal because it's going to take less time and energy than actually researching the background of this case that would have potentially exposed all of the nitty gritty that could have gotten him, acquitted basically. So,
and I don't know how many lawyers there were in that town, but I would guess that normally they deal with the most bullshit cases imaginable. Like
yeah.
someone's got a zoning issue or something.
Well, in a town of 900 people, I mean, there's 45,000-ish where I live, and I feel like that's a small town. I could not imagine living in a town with 900 people. That would just
Yeah,
be like no privacy, I feel like, because everybody would know everybody, know everything.
yeah, and again with the whole thing with the shame, you'll never stop hearing about it. That
Right.
you take it to your grave, even if you're the victim. It's
Mm-hmm.
that family, they were incestuous and all that stuff, and as far as the lawyer goes, just he probably wasn't prepared for a case like that, where there was a murder, there was sexual abuse. It's just like how small town newspapers are reporting on, the kid who climbed a tree to get a cat. You know what I
Right.
mean? So even they can't deal with it. So
Yeah.
and it's probably a case that the court was eager to sweep under the rug, get rid of it, because and in doing so, they obviously mishandled it in a big way.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Definitely.
I just
Just
don't.
to avoid a stain on their community.
Yeah, I mean, the lawyer could have gotten so much material that could have either gotten this guy exonerated or at the very least got him a reduced sentence. He just
Right.
didn't try at all.
And it's sad too, the aftermath of everything. He's still in jail. His sisters, miss him. They're going through all this effort to try and get him out. And I read online that one of the sisters even is in jail right now because she got into drugs as a coping mechanism for the trauma because I don't think they got the proper, health,
Oh, no way.
mental health and counseling and whatever social type services that they need to be healthy, productive adults and work through their trauma and their issues.
Do you know if all prisons provide mental health care? Is that a standard thing in the States?
Uh, I would imagine it would vary by state. I mean, in theory they should, but how effective it is, I don't know. I don't know how regular it is. I've unfortunately heard of instances where, people get arrested and thrown in prison and they're on, psychiatric specific meds, and then all of a sudden they're denied their meds, they act out,
Yeah,
and then it's even more intense of a prison experience for them because they're not getting the proper care.
Well, they say, yeah, one of the rough things about being in prison is that you are surrounded by a lot of mentally ill people, like people who are truly nuts. Yeah.
Well, and it's because they don't get, like some prisons don't care about mixing the general population with those who suffer from severe mental illness, and then there's repercussions for it, and it gives the, mentally unwell community a very bad stigma because they can't help it, and it makes them seem more aggressive and dangerous than they really are. But a lot of the inmates aren't educated on how to handle people with different issues and, possible developmental disabilities or ailments, things like schizophrenia. I mean, and everybody, it manifests differently. So it's like a whole spectrum of unknowing. And then you're throwing it into an already aggressive population. You're not giving them the proper care. They're not equipped to handle that. And then it's just full blown craziness.
Yeah, I mean, there used to be this ethical question about whether people who are mentally ill should be put in institutions. Like 100 years ago, that was the common practice. But many of them were so poorly run, the conditions were terrible, so they stopped doing it. But then a lot of them ended up homeless or in prison, and that's not really a good solution either.
No.
So, what can you do, right? I mean,
Well, and the thing was too, about 100 years ago, people were institutionalizing those with disabilities and mental illness because
yeah,
they were getting them out of the public eye. People were not comfortable handling that kind of stuff up close and personal,
yeah,
you
even people
know,
with Down syndrome.
the very much so. And it's terrible, the lack of care and treatment and just the amount of neglect that these people suffered because the general public could not learn to, live around these people and let them have their own lives and seek treatment that was appropriate for the time, that did not involve like shock therapy and very inappropriate medical procedures. Yes, that's terrible. But,
Yeah.
as far as the, homelessness and mental illness and imprisonment goes, I mean, that's still a huge issue today. And it doesn't help that, especially in Ohio, a lot of our prisons are starting to become privatized, where they're not run by the government, they're run by private companies. So corners get cut, even more severely than when they were government run. And, everyone suffers as a result.
Oh yeah, yeah. Shitty healthcare and all kinds of problems.
Everything, overcrowding. The COVID pandemic did not help whatsoever. It really made it scary to be a prisoner in some of these Ohio facilities because COVID was running rampant. They couldn't stop it. And especially in the early days, they didn't know how to treat it. You know, Isolation and quarantine was not a possibility. So people were scared that they were going to die and never see their families again. And I'm sure Christopher's kind of dealing with the same thing where he's at.
Well,
On top of feeling like he doesn't need to be there, which he doesn't.
Well, he actually, because Dr. Phil interviewed him on the show, and he's actually holding up pretty well. And he's just saying, they can't break me here. So that was really cool. It was a really inspiring attitude. His sisters, they feel guilty about what happened. Like they keep saying, every day that I think about him being there and I'm out here and he did it for me, they feel bad about it. But he told them, you don't feel guilty, that he's glad he did. He doesn't regret it.
Yeah.
So
It sounds like they have a lot of survivor's guilt. And
oh, totally. Yeah.
it's so heartbreaking. And I just wonder when, like, I don't know if this is something the Innocence Project could step in with, because I know they normally handle cases that were involving forensics and DNA evidence, but I mean, there's so much, testimonial evidence and paperwork involved with this. It's like, what needs to be done to kind of crack this case back open and give Chris a fighting chance to defend himself after all these years?
Well, a lawyer was one of the best defense attorneys in the States. He has said that that he would have lot of advantages if they were to open it back up, because so much evidence was not entered in. And so, it doesn't look good that all those appeals were denied, but hopefully if the governor decides to overturn it, that would be a huge leg up. I don't know if a governor can just take you out of prison? Can they just do that? Is that legal, or does it depend on the state?
I'm gonna try to Google it right now. That's a good question.
Yeah. That's what they said. They said he's the only person who could do it, who could override it. And I know that in a lot of states that have the death penalty, that the governor is the person who can cancel it, commute it, or whatever. So, all right. So I found some information here about a governor's pardon. So what it says is, in the United States, a pardon can only be granted by an executive of the government. In the case of the federal government, that means the President of the United States. And in fact, the President's right to pardon individuals is denoted explicitly in the U.S. Constitution. However, for offenses against the state, and this applies, the right of presidential pardon does not apply. In these cases, the power of pardon rests with the governor. To get a pardon in a particular state, you will generally need to receive a governor's pardon. However, in some states, the governor's wishes may not be sufficient to earn a pardon. Depending on the state, an agency like the parole board may be in charge of pardons and may decide pardons independently or in conjunction with the governor. But everybody involved with this campaign to get him released pretty much has implied that the pardon by the governor would be enough. So I guess it's possible to get that in Virginia. So, yeah.
I also did a quick little research blurb here, and it says that according to a 2021 ideology report, Virginia voters are ideologically moderate, leaning conservative. So,
well, that's not bad.
Yeah, not necessarily liberal, but not fully conservative. So there's a good median and opportunity, I feel like, for something to come of this in Christopher's benefit.
Well, if you're a morally upstanding person and you know the background of the case and why he committed the murder, I don't see why you wouldn't feel like he deserves to be let out. I mean, especially after 18 years. He's almost served like a standard murder sentence, and I don't think he had a criminal record before he did it. Or at least not for anything that serious.
Right. And when they were, before he was tried and stuff like that, did they ever release why he wasn't fit? Like, does he have any type of mental illness background or anything like that could have impacted the outcome of the trial?
Yeah, he had a lot of the standard symptoms that come with with being sexually abused, the trauma. I think he also, I don't know if don't quote me on this, I think he may have had like head injuries or something. So he definitely has a history of that kind of mental illness. Not like psychotic symptoms, but definitely some emotional imbalance. So I can see how seeing his own sister being sexually abused would just set him off and he'd lose it. But then again, if you didn't have the history of mental illness, wouldn't the average person react that way anyway? I think it'd be for most people, right?
Everyone has their breaking point, and even if it didn't start out them having mental illness, it very well could progress into that instance. I did some research on patricide, which is the murdering of a father.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's biological or not. And it does vary a little bit between adults and teenagers, but this is what I found. And I wanted to share both sides of it just because he was 18 at the time he murdered his stepfather. So, I mean, either or technically qualifies, but a lot of it does make sense that, this kind of behavior and the outcome, killing of a father figure, I mean, it's textbook. So,
yeah.
It said the central conflict that drives adults to patricide is typically relationship conflict and arguments coupled with mental illness. Adults are more likely to have planned the murder in advance. In adult males especially, there is a high likelihood of schizophrenia though other mental disorders include psychotic and depressive disorders. More specifically, for sons who commit patricide, they are often seen as less dependent, display schizophrenia, and the fathers were aggressive and abusive. In contrast, adolescent cases involve, more often than not, severe physical abuse. A child being abused sometimes overcompensates and takes matters into their own hands, either for self-protection or because they simply cannot withstand another day of the mistreatment, suggesting the crime is more likely to be spontaneous. Many trial juries have been faced with evidence of prior abuse and battering that children have endured, which ultimately proves that's the motive for murder. With adolescents who commit patricide or parricide, which is either parent, it's often in their teens with no psychosis. They're motivated by long-term abuse, but the crime itself is spontaneous, and they're more likely to kill step-parents than biological parents.
Oh, for sure.
So,
And step-parents are more likely to abuse children than biological parents. But of course, ultimately, he did it to his own children. Yeah, there's one story where one of the girls told a teacher at school, and when they called the house, their father like beat her with a belt, like left welts all over her, and I mean this guy was just evil incarnate. So he totally deserved it, and I think and anyone would, I think most people would agree. Well, except his mother. His mother would say that she hoped that Christopher would get the death penalty. So that's one person that definitely wasn't on his side. But because some parents, you just can't convince them that their kids could ever do anything wrong.
right.
So,
But it makes you wonder if she had any other instances involving Christopher, even when he was a child. You know, was this something that she was aware of, or was she somehow involved and couldn't see Vincent doing wrong? I don't know. It's all speculation.
There could have been intergenerational abuse because a lot of the people who were abused grow up and then become abusive.
Right.
And she may have had maybe his father was the patriarch and she turned a blind eye to what he was doing. So again, that thing in those old communities, these families just, they let shit go on like that for generations and it doesn't stop. And then terrible tragedies like this happen.
Unfortunately, they make it part of their family's traditions.
Oh, yeah. And in terms of what happened with the court, it's like since everyone knows each other so well, especially in a town with a population of less than 1,000, they were probably afraid of that, the good old boys and then all their friends in the community were going to hate them if they convicted if they acquitted Christopher Bennett. There was probably that factor as well. So.
And what's interesting is when I was researching, I was trying to find a lot of backstory because obviously we know he's still in jail, but who was he before all this came to light? Like, let's say 12 to 18, obviously when he was in the height of the abuse, what was he like to everyone around him? Because you never hear those stories that like, oh, we always thought he was normal or he hid it really well or no, he was deranged a little bit. He was the weird kid. You don't hear any of those stories or see any articles relating to his past. It's all about, boom, he got pissed at his stepdad for, fucking around with him and his siblings, went to go get him thrown in jail, actually caught him in the act, and just acted on impulse and stopped it. So
he was definitely troubled for a long time. I think what I heard, I think he mostly kept it to himself, never sought therapy or anything. I don't know if he ever got in trouble for the law before that or not. I remember, because I looked at the mugshot, and there's something about the look in his eyes where he seemed like he just accepted it as his fate. He wasn't fighting it. He didn't care. Maybe that fed into having low self-esteem as well. But it just looked like he just didn't expect much from life anyway. So he felt like maybe he had nothing to lose. So.
But if he really felt that way, why is he staying so strong in prison?
I don't know. I mean, I guess he just feels like Vincent doesn't deserve for him to go to prison. You know what I mean? For him to be suffering incarceration for what Vincent did. So I guess that's probably what it is.
Do you think his internal strength is a way of showing Vincent that in the end he's still alive and breathing, and that's a win for him.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think maybe he's doing it for his sisters too, because he doesn't want to give up on them, and he cares about them. It was what he was done out of love.
Right.
That's something everyone should remember as well.
Right, and it shows what kind of bond that they had even all these years later, that they're still very close, it sounds like, even though, some of them are incarcerated. They're
Yeah,
still very much family and together. And that says a lot to me.
yeah, it says a lot about his character as well. Yeah, and yeah, I don't know if they're able to actually visit him or not. If they do, it's probably the standard situation, no touching and all that.
Right.
Because the photos they have of him, he was just alone. But so maybe he's in maximum security. I don't know for sure. But the girls are still having problems with the fallout of the trauma. Dr. Phil got them therapists individually because they didn't have therapy. Maybe they couldn't afford it. One of them said she hasn't really been able to have relationships. She can't sleep in the same bed as a man. I don't know about the others, but she said it totally ruined intimacy for her. So yeah, it's been something they've been suffering from for a long, long time.
It's
You
very
don't,
tragic.
yeah, totally. So everybody, I'm going to include the link to that petition in the liner notes of this episode, and do your research on it. There's a few clips from the Dr. Phil show, and let's do our part to get this guy out of prison. So thanks for joining me this week.
Thank you so much for having me.
May your daughter get well.
Oh, hopefully, fingers crossed.
All right. Have yourself a great night now.
Thanks, you too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.